Hello and welcome back to my friend the Rainbow Circle, coming to you live from South Carolina as Hurricane Dorian closes in. But don't worry, my dogs are barking at the hurricane and will make it go away. Just kidding, they're barking at the neighbor dog, which makes just as much sense, because they will not make the neighbor dog go away either. Okay. They stopped barking. Okay. Today I wanted to talk to you about something that might actually be useful. Hold on just a second. Okay. I've replaced the dogs with Spike. Okay, he's running away. Never mind. Spike will not bark. He'll just go eat grass. Normally I don't let him out because there are birds of prey constantly around here. Red-tailed hawks, but I don't know that they could actually pick him up, but I usually try not to let him out in the backyard. So anyway, this is supposed to be about storytelling. There's a whole story going on right now with my cat and red-tailed hawks, but this one might actually be financially beneficial to you, because if you're planning to spend money on Neil Gaiman's Masterclass, don't, because it's garbage. And I got to watch the whole thing, and I did it for free, not by any illegal means. I will not disclose how I did that. However, it was not illegal, but I did get to watch it for free. And I still felt ripped off. And I hate to attack Neil Gaiman, because I prefer to support imaginative people over realists, usually. But if Neil Gaiman is charging money for teaching people about fiction, and he's giving you nothing, that's deeply immoral. So don't buy his masterclass. It's really, really, really bad and devoid of content. Don't buy creative writing textbooks. They're devoid of content. A vast majority, 99.9% of them are devoid of content. Avoid these financial scams. But specifically the reason, Neil Gaiman's Masterclass is not useful in any way, but I'll give you a sample of why it's really, really bad. And I used to love the Sandman comics, by the way. I'm not totally anti Neil Gaiman. I've never really been enthused about his fiction quite yet, but I used to love the Sandman comics. I had a creative writing teacher say, well, obviously we're influenced by Sandman. But Neil Gaiman just doesn't know anything about how stories work. So he has, in Coraline, he has an inscription that he accredits to G.K. Chesterton, even though it's a misquote. But G.K. Chesterton's actual quote is not that much better. It's the same basic point, but it's still entirely wrong. But he has this inscription in front of Coraline, and I've heard him talk about it before. But the inscription is, I don't know, I'm going to misquote it too, but kids don't read fairy tales to learn that dragons are real. They already know dragons are real. They read fairy tales to know that they can be defeated, which is complete nonsense. However, as an inscription or like a part of a speech or something like that, it's nonsense, but it's cute. So, you read it and you say, oh, that's cute. Even though it's entirely wrong, but it's cute. But this was like a centerpiece of one of his lessons. He talks about Coraline. And that's entirely wrong. So, I was watching that, and he does this quote again, and he says, "Oh, that's how Coraline works." And I said, "Oh no, he doesn't know how stories work. I'm so glad I didn't pay for this." It's sad almost. I feel really bad. I mean, I hate to attack him or anything like that, because hooray for imagination, but um, he doesn't understand imagination, sadly. So the reason why it's wrong, I'll explain why it's entirely wrong. Using Coraline. So Coraline, here comes a hurricane. Um, Coraline, spoiler alert, uh, she has these very scary encounters with a monster called the Other Mother. And spoiler alert, she defeats her at the end. If you're unfamiliar with Coraline or how those kind of stories tend to work, she wins in the end. The way that story works is that it heightens your stimulation by empathetic experience with Coraline as she's in danger from the Other Mother. And the story ends when she defeats the Other Mother. Neil Gaiman is saying that the way the story works is that it's teaching us that we can defeat the Other Mother. But that's really just the end of the story. That's not the purpose of the story. And he talks about all the people inspired by Coraline to be brave, and that's wonderful. That's not a universal concept of storytelling, but that's nice when people are inspired by Coraline. That's not something you can apply to all stories. To understand the actual mechanism of Coraline itself is to understand that the stimulation of the story is in the actual danger Coraline's going through. It's in the presence of the Other Mother causing her fear. That's where the story gets its value. Once the fear is over, the story ceases to have that particular value, and the story's over. Conveniently, when fear leaves the story's over. So the actual analogy should be, kids don't read fairy tales to learn that dragons are real. Kids read fairy tales to scare themselves very directly. Because there are fairy tales where you don't defeat dragons, and there are fairy tales, and even if it had a detailed instruction about how to defeat the dragon, kids are not going to use the lesson about how to defeat the dragon. They might be inspired to defeat any sort of obstacle, but that's ultimately irrelevant to the story. So, and I think, Coraline's clearly inspired by Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. And I think if you look at Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, two of the poems that she encounters are Jabberwocky and The Walrus and the Carpenter, that are very directly satirizing fairy tale structures and children's poetry. But in Jabberwocky, the kid in that defeats a dragon, or whatever Jabberwocky is, just a nonsense monster. And in The Walrus and the Carpenter murder a bunch of kids, a bunch of children. So it's two opposite stories, both of them brilliant stories. So if and you can stretch it and say, The Walrus and the Carpenter teaches kids how to defy monsters like the Walrus and the Carpenter. But treating the stories that way just completely dismisses what is actually delightful about both of those stories. Everything within the content of both of those stories is delightful. Whether it's pure evil and terror and horribleness, or just language ceasing to function the way language is supposed to. So learning a lesson about defeating monsters is a nice consequence, but it's not the purpose of the story. And if that's, if you read a story without any sort of lesson about how to defeat monsters, it's still a great story. Spike is now attacking a red string, and he's very scared of the red string. But as I was indulging in Masterclass for free, I watched Malcolm Gladwell's Masterclass, and I never really gave Malcolm Gladwell a chance before, because I heard him, I saw a presentation, I guess it was a TED Talk or something, where he was talking about David and Goliath, and he said the reason why we have David and Goliath all wrong is because Goliath had acromegaly like Andre the Giant, therefore he wasn't such a fierce warrior, which demonstrated a misunderstanding of Andre the Giant. So I was like, this guy must not know what he's talking about, so I'm not interested. But then I watched his Masterclass, and he knew so much more about storytelling than Neil Gaiman did. And a basic example is, one of his analogies was a puzzle. You have a puzzle that has one missing piece. Somebody sees that puzzle with one missing piece, that sort of encourages them to want to fill that piece in. And he said, it doesn't matter if you actually do fill that piece in. You can, and it's a fine ending, but you can leave that puzzle piece out, and it's a fine ending too. It doesn't really matter if you actually complete the puzzle for the person. What matters is you're stimulating their desire to complete the puzzle. Exponentially better understanding of storytelling than Neil Gaiman. And that's why I started binging all the Malcolm Gladwell this year. I keep referencing Malcolm Gladwell this year, or because I decided to just read everything he wrote, because maybe he does understand more about storytelling. And that's something I've been desperate to find, because in my experience, people who try to explain storytelling give you BS like stories. Teach us how to defeat dragons, or teach us stories are valuable because they teach us lessons. Well, that's ridiculous. Even someone whose whole purpose is to teach nonfiction concepts understands even better that teaching is just, ultimately a relevant consequence of the actual story itself. The story is in the incomplete puzzle that encourages us to try to complete it. So anyway, if you want to purchase Masterclass, get Malcolm Gladwell's instead. It's a lot better. So, public service announcement there. Stay safe in Hurricane Dorian, which might just be a bunch of wind at this point, but anyway, I'll see you next time.